Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Dave Smallwood. Dave is a Principal Team Teach trainer and Company Director of SENse Training and Consultancy. He's worked in special schools for both the local authority and for the National Autistic Society. As a staff development coordinator for the National Autistic Society, he's also delivered and developed training in autism, equality, diversity and rights. Dave is also an occasional co-host of the Team Teach podcast. And today, Dave and I are talking about supporting children and young people through exam stress. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hi, Claire. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. We are here today. It's like a marriage ceremony, but it's not. It's not to celebrate anyone's wedding, but we are talking about exam stress. So we might have listeners working in the primary sector, thinking about SATs exams, those in the secondary sector, and also those actually working in special needs or alternative provisions. So we'll try and keep it quite broad. If you could give a quick intro to the listener, and I mean quick, David, about your background.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. Hi, I'm Dave. I'm a principal trainer for Team Teach. Deliver a range of positive behaviour management training and also training that really looks into special educational needs and disabilities. And my background really is working with individuals that have a formal diagnosis of autism in education. There,
amazing.
That quick enough for you?
That was very quick. Thank you, Dave. And my name's Clare Edmondson. Like Dave, I am a principal trainer for Team Teach. My background's quite varied. I've worked in lots of different services, including mental health services, pupil referral units, alternative provisions, and autism specialist schools. And yeah, that's pretty much me. Oh, we're doing something around exam stress. So I should mention as well that I'm doing my diploma in counselling, which is kind of helpful, I think, for this topic as well. Thinking about managing stress and things is something we cover on our course. So I've got quite a few ideas about this. Let's start with our reflective questions. So hopefully I can say it today. What you wish you knew then that you know now. You start, Dave.
Okay. Just understanding that everybody's different, everybody feels pressures differently, and how the stress of exams and the pressure manifests itself will be different in different individuals. And it's spotting those things. People might have a meltdown, or they might just completely shut down. And we need to just keep an eye on people and think of people as individuals. That's my bit.
Brilliant, Dave. I think that is really important, that everyone manifests their stress in different ways. I think for me, and I think this might come up a little bit in your top tip, Dave, that we discussed off air, but I think for me it is trying to keep an open mind, which I don't think I did when I was doing exams, that one exam, whatever it isn't the be all and end all, which it really feels like. And I think sometimes in schools, we set up children and young people to kind of think that it is the be all and end all. And that kind of fixed thinking, if I don't pass this, the world might end, or I might feel, really distressed. But there are always other options. There are always retakes. There are always different pathways to a different future. And so I think I talk about it quite a lot on the podcast, but I do really believe in that kind of growth mindset. And I do wish that perhaps I'd known that when I was younger. And I have throughout my career always tried to instill that in the individuals that I support, because when we start to have kind of perfectionist traits or very fixed mindsets about, if I don't do well in this, this will happen, I think that's when we can get particularly stressed. So that I wish that I'd known a bit more about that, I think, kind of earlier on in my career, I'd say.
It is interesting though, like earlier in your career, so that's you working with the young people, and you wish you'd known that then. Really, you probably did know that it's not the be all and end all. But do you think it's the way the education system's set up, maybe that we're conditioned to tell young people that it is the be all and end all, and it is all going to end, isn't it?
I think then I wouldn't have had the skills to be able to take the stress away from the young people and separate my stress from their stress. So I was working in secondary provisions, and actually in particularly in mainstream schools, you are judged, performance related pay is judged on your exam results. So I think I would have found it, and did find it, a lot more difficult. I mean, I was only in my sort of mid-20s, I think, when I was teaching in mainstream school. But yeah, to separate my stress of the scrutiny of that and my perfectionism. And I think now, and as I went on through my career, I was like, oh, I'd be like, whatever, and become a bit more, I don't know, I can shield that stress from the young people and children that I work with more because I feel more confident in my skills. But certainly earlier on in my career, that was really tricky. And I think about the listeners now, and it's not, my experience was in, GCSEs and A levels, but I think about the SATs pressure for year 6 teachers, and it's being mindful, isn't it, that we're thinking about how do we support exam stress for children and young people, but also how do we support staff with exam stress is key, right, as well.
Well, that's it, and that's the big thing. We've got teachers across the country, uh, across the board, across education, that are stressed because they're mindful of their job and the impact it's going to have on them as an individual themselves, and then we project this stress onto other people. So I don't. It's a difficult one though. It's so difficult because it's so hard for teachers because they are thinking about their jobs, but also they do want the children to do well and pass their exams. And we have to put a certain amount of pressure on children to pass their exams because we don't want to have a whole education system where people are saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's going to be all right." It probably will be all right, but we do want them to pass the exams at the same time. We do have to put on a little bit of pressure. It's a tough balance, isn't it, to come about?
It is a tough balance, but there's some good research around challenge, and not necessarily the word pressure, but the word challenge, that actually we do need to be under a bit of pressure, under a bit of challenge to perform at our best. So in some ways you could argue that exam pressure, exam stress is potentially, for some individuals, a healthy way of preparing for later life, where we kind of perform at our best when we do have a little bit of challenge. But I think the difficulties for those listening, for staff listening in schools, is going to be around those children that actually that additional pressure sends them over the edge of, we might call it the window of tolerance, if we're using Dan Siegel's kind of method, where it sends someone into a state of being, hypersensitive and hyper aroused because the stress is too much. And that individual doesn't have the resources yet to be able to build their tolerance level of that additional pressure. So I think on the part, there are so many children and young people that will take it in their stride. But I guess on this podcast today, we're thinking about those that are going to potentially struggle with it because they haven't built the resources yet to be able to manage that kind of challenge and stress.
Yeah, they're the ones that we're looking at, aren't they?
Did you know that Team Teach also offers a coaching and consultancy service? It's an effective way to build positive cultures. Let's work together to map out a strategic plan tailored around your needs, support your staff with coaching sessions from our experienced team, and help you create, change and improve professional practice throughout your organisation. Visit the Team Teach website to find out more.
So where would stress come from then, other than the pressures that we put on? Because it is a pressured environment, but I'm thinking around understanding of revision
Mhm.
pressures at home, because it's not just from school, is it?
Yeah, it might be parents and caregivers putting additional stress onto the child, but not even, I guess, meaning to, just wanting the best, for their child or young person. And I suppose that can add on the load to the individual. I think also social media, um, the kind of more populist media, it's always, I mean, after exam results, doesn't it always say in every single newspaper, exams are getting easier, and things like that? But I don't know, like the stress and the build up to the exams is just so much, I think, for children and young people.
It
And
is.
then you're thinking about peers as well. So some groups, some of the schools I've worked in, actually there's a peer pressure to not do well in exams, of, being smart is nerdy, or, geeky, or whatever, word we want to put in there. But in other realms, there's going to be this competitive nature, and people bullying others for, being dumb, in inverted commas, and things like that. So there's so much in that kind of world of that child or young person, so many pressures coming from so many different areas. You can understand why sometimes it spills out.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. No, you really, really can. And but how do we help them? You mentioned social media a moment.
Uh-huh.
I've been doing some reading, um, and I saw a tip somewhere. I thought, oh, wow, that's a good idea. Um, Using social media. They didn't say to use social media, but making videos of the subjects that you're looking at. So fun videos. And in the world of fun videos and TikTok and whatever young people look at nowadays, that's what they're doing. They're making these videos, aren't they? So making fun videos about your subject can be a helpful way of revising. I thought that was quite an inventive way of doing it.
That is really inventive, like taking some of the pressure away, perhaps from someone that maybe academically might have some difficulties as well, where it's so word heavy sometimes, isn't it? And turning that into something visual could take some of the load off. I love that. But
Yeah, and
also with, oh, sorry, go on, Dave.
sorry, I was just going to add to it. I think you're absolutely right, because something else I read, um, specifically about autistic individuals.
Hmm.
But I think it relates to a lot of us. Certainly, me. It struck home with me that revision can be quite difficult. And if you think of an autistic young person, their mind saying to them, "Why do I need to revise? I've done this and it's finished now. Or
Mm.
why would I go back over it? I've already done it." And that's something that used to happen with me.
Hmm.
Why am I doing this? I've already read it. It's already in.
Hmm.
And I couldn't get past that point, and I found it really, really difficult. So if you find a fun way to do it, like a video, and actually do it rather than just reading it, then I think that's a really good way of getting it sunk in. Can I have that as a top tip? That's one of my top tips, listeners.
No, no, Dave, it's not top tip time yet. We still
Uh,
have at least 5 or 6 minutes to get
okay,
through.
okay.
The I'm just building on from that. I think one of the things I've struggled with during exams, and I know lots of the children and young people I work with struggle with the same, is my executive functioning. So I'm dyslexic, so it doesn't really present itself in reading. It's more actually my organizing, structuring things. So when I did my GCSEs and A levels quite a long time ago, and even my degree, it was absolute chaos in my head and in my bedrooms, because I found it really difficult to organize myself, do timetables, stick to the timetables. Because actually, if you think about it, that is a lot of executive functioning. So I think when we're supporting individuals, whether they have executive functioning difficulties or not, it's actually about trying to take some of that load off. And I think structuring and supporting structure for exams is really important. So that might be things like helping someone to do a really visual timetable of when they're going to do things, helping someone to break the topics down into manageable chunks, can be really helpful. I would have benefited from kind of group study. As a teenager, I absolutely would not have done that, Dave. There was no way I would have attended. But, as an adult, I'm like, oh, that actually would have really benefited me to have some group study, to have someone that was better with executive functioning to kind of help model the ways to do things. Because I was
Yeah.
constantly losing bits of paper and files, and I'm still the same now to an extent. I know you are as well, Dave,
Oh,
but
I am. Yeah, I'm terrible. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it's trying to, as practitioners, just take off some of that additional load. And of course, I'm thinking about me with dyslexia, but I just think that's for everyone, because that structure and helping to plan revision and plan actually how to revise can take some of that additional load that someone might have around the stress of exams.
Yeah, yeah. Planning. We're back to planning. We always find our way back to planning, but it is really important. And just people need that structure um, delivered to them in different ways. And how can we think of all these different ways? Sorry, you look like you're going to ask something.
I was waiting to see if you were asking something, Dave, but I'm going to ask something now. But I was just thinking, you mentioned about autism. I am conscious of time, so now I'm about to ask a question that I just that I'm like, oh my gosh, how long have we got to answer this? But I am interested in autistic individuals and exams, and I was just wondering if it would be any different for an autistic individual to actually sit the exam. I know your background of working, in the field of autism for a long time. I just wondered if you'd thought if there might be any differences.
I think so. Sensory needs is a big one.
Hmm.
Um, we think of when we think of autism, we think of sensory overload,
Mm,
hypersensitivity to certain things, light, sounds. Um, so a lot of the research that I've been reading is about making sure the environment's quiet,
mm,
which is true. But if it's too quiet, I think that can be quite overwhelming as well.
mm,
When people say silence is deafening, I mean, it is sometimes. Sometimes they need a little bit. So possibly like people mention noise cancelling headphones, but I think maybe a pre-approved playlist of music, possibly with headphones, so that might help them possibly, because those sensory needs need to be addressed.
mm.
I know one of your top tips. I
Are you
don't
about to take it?
want to ruin it, but I'll come to it after. But yes, it does affect people, and then how they take on information. I mean, they take on a lot of information, and then how do we figure out which information we need? Uh,
Hmm.
so it's revision, but what information am I going to need? And then when we're giving people advice, specifically with autism, everybody's got a bit of advice to give, haven't they? So
Hmm.
he tries to help and gives a little bit of advice to get advice from home, get advice from different teachers. And that can be quite overwhelming as well. Which bit do I listen to? And that creates
Hmm.
anxiety. Or they try and do everything that everybody's told them to do. Everybody's told me different things, so I try and do everything. And then that creates a lot of anxiety as well. So now they're not thinking about the exam or the subject, they're thinking about all the advice that they've been given and how they're going to do everything that
Hmm.
everybody said.
It's like overload, isn't it? But as you were speaking, Dave, and I specifically asked you about something or individuals, or autistic individuals, I was just thinking, gosh, this is the same. It's the same for anyone. I know things might be amplified with our autistic children and young people, where usually, not always, but usually there is a root of lots of anxiety because of social and communication needs and various other things. But so there might be a more heightened sense of anxiety. But everything Dave just said there, about supporting an autistic individual, it just worked for everyone, doesn't it? Of just trying to reduce load. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting. I am conscious of time, Dave.
Yeah.
I was really firm with you at the start of the podcast that we weren't going to overrun today. I was very firm.
Yes, although I've still got something I wanted to add. I'm
Add
sorry.
it, add it.
It's really quick. It's really quick. But with autistic individuals, potentially the reasonable adjustments might need to be made. So maybe a quiet room, uh, sitting them at the back, trying to bring in movement breaks sometimes. Those things can really help somebody.
Yeah.
Because to regulate themselves, they might need to do something else to regulate their own emotion. I know a lot in education we call it stimming, possibly, but maybe they need that little bit of a release physically. So to get up and they need to move around, bounce around, just to regulate themselves so that they can get back to doing the work. So I think those movement breaks can be quite important as well.
I'm just building it into the structure of formal exams and informal exams that those things happen. And obviously, this podcast episode isn't about applying for, exam allowances and things, but obviously, some of our individuals might need those exam allowances. They might need a prompter, and you'd go through the usual mechanisms with your exam officer to provide evidence and apply for those things. But I think we can informally, without those additional formal bits, have certain things in place to help support those that really need it. But I thought I'd just move us on to our top tips. We've already given some practical things across the podcast, but I was going to start off with my top tip that you really nearly wanted to steal during your moment because it's such a good one.
And it would have been handy because I've forgotten my first one.
Well, I'm not going to prompt you. You have to remember it. So my first top tip is something that I've done in the pupil referral units and alternative provisions and autism provisions I've worked in, where we do a rehearsal for the exam. So it's not actually someone sitting the paper, but it's all the kind of sensory experience, the stress experience. So we do a walking, talking kind of just practice. So things like the young people and children handing in their phone for the exam, and just pretending that the actual exam is happening, putting coats and bags down. So particularly in the pupil referral units that I worked in, actually having your bag, put to the side with other people's handing phone in could be quite tricky, and actually not something that that someone was so keen on doing. So rehearsing it was super helpful. And then actually just sitting in the seat, knowing that that's your seating plan, that's where you'll be sitting. So you can kind of see the people around and look around and be quite familiar with it. And we wouldn't just do that rehearsal once. That is something that we started with our younger pupils across the school schedule. So it was just something we just kept practicing, because rehearsal helps take away anxiety. Even someone just knowing how quiet the exam room is going to be. And also for some of the individuals that I've worked with, knowing that the consequences of not being quiet during the exam actually is really tricky, and actually can mean that you're asked to leave. So it's, sometimes quite different from a school lesson. So you're not going to be asked to leave necessarily if you call out and things. So that rehearsal for me was one of the most important things that we did. And as I say, not just as a one-off, but building that in across the school timetable to help relieve some of that stress. So that's my top tip.
Yeah, that's great. And just to add to that, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but when you do practice these things and having those things in place is fantastic. Get feedback from the students. How did they feel? What do they feel worked well? What did they feel didn't work so well? I think that's really important as well, because you will be like this, you will do this. That adds pressure in itself. But you tell me how you feel, and then they can give us advice on how we can reduce their anxieties.
Yeah, love that, Dave. Is that because you can't remember yours now?
Yes. No. Yes. I did remember it and I've forgotten it again. But I had another one. Mapping.
Yeah.
Big piece of paper out. And then pop feelings in the middle, and then have all the feelings coming off. How are they feeling inside? What are their emotions? And just map it all out, and then we can see things. Then we can see things that we wouldn't usually expect, and then we can start putting things in perspective. It's like, well, I've got an exam coming up. I've been told if I don't get an A, then I'm never going to be able to go to university. Well, actually, you probably will be able to go to university. And I think that kind of merges in with my other top tip, which is let's be realistic and put things into perspective. There are other avenues that we can explore. It's not the end of the world if you fail an exam. It really isn't. And maybe you're not ready yet at the moment to do your maths and English because of the pressures of the other GCSEs that you're taking. But you will be able to take them again at some point when the pressures aren't so high. You can do just maths and just English. But that has to be balanced out. Because I don't want, and I'm sure most people don't want secondary schools across the country saying that to all the students, but that is the reality of it, isn't it?
It is, Dave. Excellent and very succinct, actually. So I'm feeling like we're just about on time, which is amazing. But all joking aside, I think there's been some really amazing just bits of guidance and a few ideas for practitioners listening. So thank you so much for your time today, Dave.
Thank you, Claire. It's been a pleasure as always.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.